Thank you so much for being here, guys. My name's Gina Barker. I'm the Senior Manager of Foundation Relations at Best Friends Animal Society, and I am so excited you guys are here. We have some absolute industry experts in the room, and we're going to go ahead and do 30 minutes of some questions that we thought would be really important for you guys to hear, but we want to give you plenty of time to have access to ask them your questions directly, so we're doing an extra long 15-minute Q&A. So yeah, if you have any good questions, be thinking on them. And I would love to introduce you to everybody here. I'll go ahead and start with you, Brett.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brett Yates. I'm the CEO at Michelson Found Animals Foundation, and we are a large grantor in the space and anxious to have this conversation.
Hello, I'm Lori Grange. Strategy officer. I don't ever get a mint before you're
I should have taken longer, huh?
Yeah. Or just chew it immediately. Try that again. Lori Grange, Strategy Officer at the Hewlett Foundation. Should say I'm also one of the 65% of people who prefer snuggling with their pets. The Hewlett Foundation is based in Menlo Park, and I should say it's the unceded land of the Ramaytush and Ohlone tribes. Nice, great to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Hutchinson. I'm with Social Capital Partnerships. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you all today. So energized and inspired by the work that you all do in your communities. It's amazing. Thank you for all you do. Social Capital Partnerships is based in Chicago. We are a consulting partner to nonprofits at the local, state, and national, and even international levels. I work in philanthropic communications. Prior to my time at Social Capital, I was kind of boots on the ground fundraiser and grant maker at large and small nonprofits. So I know the space that you're in. I know the many, many hats that you wear. I understand how difficult it is to approach fundraising. And I'm here to see if I can help answer some questions and make that whole process a little easier for you all.
So with that, our first questions are going to kind of be looking at the cultivation side of work, right? Like, what even is cultivation? It's that moment before you've begun to have an actual partnership with that funder. And so I'll kick the first question off to Mary here. Mary, you've had to do this. You've had to grind and go ask for money. So when you think about that work, what does cultivation mean to you?
I think cultivation is, we first of all, I should say, we won the award for most awkward room in the whole conference. So I'm trying to, we should get little tags for that maybe. Trying to make eye contact with everyone, but know that we see you on the far stretches and we're glad you're all here. Cultivation is about the relationship building process between you and a prospective funder. It can be a grind, as Gina said. It can take a long time, but it's always time well spent. One of the most painful things is when an organization that I'm working with says, I don't have time to call in advance, I'm just going to write this proposal and send it out the door. Because they haven't taken that time to build the relationship and get to know the funder, their chances of building a long-term, sustainable, fruitful relationship are just that much smaller. So the relationship building process starts with getting your foot in the door, and that's kind of a question that we get a lot is, how do you begin? Think about your network. It could be you that has the strongest contact at that prospective donor or foundation, but it might be someone on your board, your staff, one of your many, many volunteers, someone who's adopted an animal from your organization. Think about who might have that best first step to make that introduction to your organization. And even better yet, start to build a web of relationships between your organization and the prospective funder so that there's a real true partnership brewing. It's also important to remember that it's a two-way street, the conversation. You're beginning the sale of your organization and your great work, but it's also really important to try to get to know the funder, right? And ask what motivates them, what are their guidelines, what are their rules, what do they really like to see, what makes a partnership successful for them, so that, again, it begins to create this mutually beneficial partnership.
That leads into a great question here for Lori. So some of the times we don't actually have like necessarily a great organic inroad, right? And that might be cold cultivation, but what advice would you give to grant writers if there's a warm lead, if there's not a warm lead, into building that relationship, opening that door? What should they be considering before they pick up the phone, before they send an email? Should they be sending that email? Should they be making a phone call? What's the strategy to actually make first contact, which is the tense part, right?
Great, thank you. And I should say I've been a grant maker. I've been on the nonprofit side, so I feel the pain, and I know the pain. So I'll just build on what Mary talked about, because that is difficult if the networks aren't there, and even building the networks can be very hard. And some of these things may be obvious. Some of these things may be things that you do all the time. So if that's the case, think of this as affirmation. So the first is just try to, as Mary said or alluded to, try to do some research to get to know the foundation before you reach out in any way. In addition to the obvious, the website, LinkedIn, Google folks, the foundation, but Google people to the extent you can. Obviously, have a clear understanding of what their criteria are, as Mary said, but also how they like to be approached. In addition, asking a ton of questions about the foundation can be important beyond criteria. Where'd they get their money? What are their programs and particular projects within their programs that they fund, including whether they fund outside the animal issues? How might you frame your work to fit in with non-animal issues or projects? As Mary said, I love what she said about finding folks who can make the connections. This is difficult to say, but if you are grant writers and you're not executive directors or board members and so forth, might I suggest that you set that person up to make the connection. Again, no disrespect toward grant makers or grant writers. I've been in that position before, but that can be helpful. A couple of other quick things. One is just to know your story. No matter how you reach out, know your story and be able to tell it. What brought you to this work? What are your organization's values? What does your organization care about this work? Because no matter how you get in, no matter how you approach it, that is really, really important. The final thing is, and this relates to maybe some other questions Gina will pose, is, again, no matter how you get in, stay on mission. It's really easy to bend or want to bend your priorities to make them fit to what a funder wants. And unfortunately, a lot of funders will make your lives miserable as a result, which we can talk about a little bit later. So as hard as it may be, I would just say resist, because your mission is defined by you, and that matters most. So this all happens in part way ahead of your trying to find inroads, but I mentioned that because that kind of pre-work, that pre-thinking is important.
Thank you, Lori. And Brett, this question's for you, another part of the aspects of cultivation, but what does appropriate staffing mean to you when you think about, what does having the right staff to do the fundraising work mean in setting an organization up for success? And especially when we have smaller rescues or shelters that might not have the full budget to maybe invest in that area, what could they do? How could they approach it differently? And what role should the executive director play in fundraising?
So just quick show of hands, and keep them up for a second, but who's executive director or senior leadership at an organization? Most, okay. For those of you that are grant writers and fundraisers, you can still hear this. But I believe really firmly that the role of the executive director and the senior leadership should be to be out in the public and expanding the network. And I think it's critical that a lot of us are doing great work for animals, and it's really easy to get caught behind the kennels and not getting out in the public. If you're not doing that, you're not getting in front of elected officials, you're not getting to events, you're not getting to a lot of things where you will meet the people that can be your grant funder. And I think it's critical that as executive leader, as executive director, you usually get invitations to things that other people won't. And it's critical that you start going to those if you're not already doing it. If you are like so many of us that you don't like going to the events, get over it. It's part of the job. And I think it's really something that everyone needs to get used to, is showing up for an event on a regular basis, meeting new people, developing the small talk skills to be able to know who people are as funders. We'll talk about this more in a little bit, but there are so many funders that are outside of classic animal welfare. I look at some of the funders for animal welfare. Everyone's going to look to PetSmart, to Petco, to Maddie's Fund, to even MFA as some of the funders. There's so many more outside of that are willing to. They don't know where to put their money, and you just haven't found them yet. So I think the executive director needs to be out finding those people. The senior leadership needs to be finding those people. And then, as Mary said, the staff needs to be putting some time to that too. If they run into someone in their neighborhood and they're walking their dog and you find out who the right person is, that's fantastic. But really, the executive director needs to be spending a lot more time on that. I know that may not be something that everyone loves to hear, but if it's not you and that's not in your DNA, I think you need to hire someone that can do that and have them get out and do it for you, because it is a critical component. We are all underfunded. I shouldn't say we. Y'all are dramatically underfunded. Don't shoot the messenger. But everybody's underfunded in this game, and there's not enough money out there right now the way the classic channels have been. So I think it's on you guys to go find where those channels are and track them down.
Ugh, this one hits home because it does lead into our next question that I have for Lori here. And it's one of the ones that I feel like I'm constantly thinking about it as a grant writer, as somebody that's going out and trying to find monies for the organization and for the amazing programs that I want to see fully funded and supported. But should people that are in traditionally animal welfare spaces be seeking out health and human service funding? Should we be looking for avenues to reach large foundations that maybe haven't thought about giving to animal welfare? And from your perspective with the Hewlett Foundation, what advice would you give to people to go out and try to cultivate partners that maybe haven't thought about giving to animal welfare before?
Yeah, thank you. So as hard as it may be with your bandwidth and resource limitations, it is well worth doing that for precisely the reasons that Brett said, that there aren't enough animal welfare funders, and there are many, many more funders that fund in programs outside of animals, but also because you have good stories to tell about how people's and animals' well-being is fundamentally interconnected. So I actually am on the board of Animal Grant Makers, which is a funder affinity group, and one of our goals, frankly, is to educate funders, animal funders, about the interconnections they need to make. And I'll mention just a few. The starting point for you, I would suggest, is what's in your community? What are the issues that your community faces? You all may be working with other organizations as we speak, but if you aren't, or if you can think further about the issues facing your community, that's a great place to start. I'll mention just a few actually beyond human services, health and human services, and I think about those as domestic violence survivors, homeless people and housing needs, which actually Michelson has been great about working on, lower income seniors, low income workers and their families, people with disabilities, survivors of natural disasters, your local community foundations may work across any and all of those. I'll mention just a couple of other points. An issue that many non-animal funders are thinking about, the broader field of philanthropy is thinking about, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, in particular racial justice. This is both a moral imperative, and it's essential, again, to achieving funders' goals in whatever issue that they're working on, whether it's animals or something, or any other issue, frankly. And I'm pretty sure it's imperative for your goals as well. And so, think about seeking funding not only for your animal work, but also from, say, non-animal funders for your work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and building partnerships and collaboration with organizations in your community, in particular those that are led by BIPOC leaders and or serving BIPOC communities. Let me say one other thing about that, is that in terms of thinking about partnerships with those organizations, with those leaders, who may not work on animal issues. Don't do it if you're not authentic about those partnerships. Because if you're not authentic, it's the wrong thing to do and it's the ineffective thing to do. And if you want to know whether you have authentic partnerships, ask those organizations because they will be the best ones to kind of vouch for you. But at any rate, it's only to say that diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly racial justice, is increasingly a huge issue and issue of importance to the broader philanthropic sector. So if that is of interest to you, and I really hope it is, that also may be an entry point outside of animal funders.
I do genuinely love that, like telling human stories through the animal welfare lens, essentially, as a way to get people to open their eyes a bit in what's in an area of their community maybe they hadn't traditionally thought of funding. Mary, so we're going to move into a couple of questions here about like the proposal writing process, what goes into a good proposal, and the ever important stewardship process, which is how we thank and keep our partners engaged through the work that they've funded. So Mary, first question for you, as somebody who's done it, what is in a standout proposal from your point of view, and has there been anything that's changed that people want to see more of or even potentially less of in proposals?
That's a great question. I'm going to try to do a little proposal writing 101 in like 2 minutes here. Who was in the session this morning on grant writing? I'm glad to see that because I think one of the points that she highlighted was how much of the work comes before you actually get pen to paper. And I will reiterate that here. And in the context of Gina's question, the work that comes before you sit down at your keyboard or put the pen to paper is around your organization story. It's just where we were on the previous question. How do you tell your organization's story? What are your strategies, your goals, and your programs? Without those, it's very hard to write a successful proposal. As a reader of proposals, it's really easy to tell when an organization doesn't have those strategies in place or maybe made them up to try to get the grant written quickly. So unfortunately, a lot of that legwork needs to come before you even start to pursue the funding. And then again, in terms of standout proposal, Gina's questions, I think about clarity and context. And clarity, I mean, your reviewers are as busy as you are, right? Picture them reading it late at night or on an airplane or right before they're trying to get to the grant review meeting. They're busy, right? So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to find the information that they've asked for. Short paragraphs, bullets, spit their language in the question back out at them. So if the question is, what are your goals? It is okay to say, our goals are, right? Goal 1, goal 2, goal 3. And it can look a little elementary. We're used to sort of more flowery, complex storytelling. But what we really want to do is boil it down and make it easy for your reviewer to find what you need. What they've asked for and what they need. You can use bold to say our mission is, and really make it easy on the reader and the eyes. And then when I think about context, hopefully by the time you are writing the proposal, you do have that relationship with the potential funder, but you want to assume that your reviewer knows nothing about your organization, your cause, animal welfare, or your goals. So you really want to give them the context of here's the problem, here's our solution, here's why our organization is best suited to offer that suite of services. So give them the context and avoid jargon, avoid things that are common language to you in your everyday work, but if you're outside of the animal welfare space, you might not be familiar with. So assume that your reader knows nothing. And then lastly, really focus on impact. Your stories just pull up people's hearts, right? You do amazing work, and you really pull at the heartstrings. What you want to be sure that you do is match that up with the storytelling around your impact and how you measure that, how you quantify that, how you track that, so that the donor has a real clear understanding of how their dollars will make a difference to your organization, to your program, and ultimately to your communities.
Mary, would you recommend emojis or
I have yet to see a successful proposal with an emoji. I do like full sentences. So when I say like keep it clear and concise, we're still looking for, you want to put your best foot forward in this proposal, but that does not include emojis or slang or incomplete sentences unless we're using them in a bullet form. What are some other good ones that you've seen?
I think just, one page with a big smiley face on it is gonna,
Yeah.
other good proposals?
Or just any other good proposals or things to avoid. Any other watch out. So we're gonna avoid emojis. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think
add to the list.
you named a few, doing the mirror image of what makes a good proposal. So I'd say, do the things you said and don't do the opposite of that, frankly. I guess one other thing I would say is back to mission. As a funder, I would say it's fairly obvious when an organization is kind of stretching past their mission. Some funders, unfortunately, want you to do that, or they are really focused on what they need. I would say my recommendation is don't do it, both because a funder often can spot it, and because again, it's not necessarily good for you. So, and then that I think is most important. But I like everything that Mary said, and I guess the other thing I'd say, I'm a former journalist, so I appreciate the value of telling stories, and it may or may not be appropriate, but sometimes with proposals, it's nice to start out with literally a story. Either it can be about a person or an animal, or hopefully both, that also speaks to their interest.
Oh, I love that advice of just, it's almost like when you're writing a mass mailer letter, right, that's going out to a wider audience, they always have a really great story to pull in. And to do that in a proposal, even at the top, is a riskier but probably really effective tool when used with the right funders.
Yeah.
And then, Mary, to your point of like simplifying, like I literally will run proposals through a Hemingway editor because it'll tell me what reading level I'm at, and I'm like, 8th grade, ooh, I need to take this down 2 notches because I want to make it that easy for people to read. And and we have extremely intelligent trustees and foundation partners that are reading these. That's not it. It's about, I am busy. I want to be able to understand this quickly and succinctly. So when I used to think 500 word counts was a challenge to meet, I've been like, can I actually cut that word count in half in some instances? So.
That's great.
So this question for you, Lori, is if you could kind of give us, could you pull back the curtain and tell us like what happens when people are trying to make a decision on how to actually select grantees? Like, all right, I have 100 proposals stacked up on my desk, and the trustees are all going to get together, and I'm the staff member that might be helping determine decisions to make, or like what does that look like in the boardroom? I would love to know.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because honestly, there's just no one size fits all. It just so much depends on the foundation. At my foundation, it's actually the program officers who really decide. The board doesn't, our president doesn't. So in that sense, at some foundations, and this again is hopefully there are ways to find this out, but who does the decision making and how, and literally who is that? Another is to just get a sense of how they are, how they prioritize. And if, one easy way, if you can, is just ask. Could be a simple email to the organization or not, but a starting point could be ask them what they prioritize if that's not obvious in the criteria. Again, it just depends on the foundation. Some foundations prioritize what mostly closely adheres to their needs and issues. Some prioritize relationships and external credibility. So to Mary's suggestion, if you have connections or connections to connections that can reach out for you or make introduction, that can give you credibility. So when somebody is reading a bunch of proposals and they get to yours, they may have familiarity, or you think, oh, this has credibility to me. This organization's already on my radar screen. Some may prioritize need. I know that organizations have already talked about no-kill rates, and that's really important. Some may prioritize that. Some may prioritize potential partnerships and collaboration, your ability to show that you're working with other people in the communities, including folks outside of animal welfare. Others may prioritize, frankly, how you can create a partnership with them. I think Brett just spoke to that a little bit in terms of, prioritizing their ability to, well, honestly, funders have big egos, so, if it's maybe about promoting their brand, promoting their support, it may be about work that they can do or their ability to get closer to the clients, get closer to the beneficiaries. So, to the extent that you can provide those opportunities to them. It really is difficult to say, again, it's not one size fits all. So to the degree that you can find out this information from the beginning about who makes the decisions and what they really prioritize, I know that's simple and straightforward, but because there's no easy answer to that, the best thing you can try to do is research. The other thing I would actually say is, this isn't directly in point, but one of the things that many funders have on their websites is the list of grants that they have made. Sometimes that's not necessarily something obvious that you should take a look at, but I highly encourage you to do so, especially if they include grantee organizations within your community, because that may well give you a sense of what they prioritize.
And now we're going to kind of ask a couple of stewardship-related questions, right? The thank you. I always think of stewardship as the moment when the real work begins. And that's about how can now I've engaged with somebody, they're interested in the program, that they actually want to fund it. How do I keep them engaged and knowing what's happening throughout the process of how we're managing that grant? And so we were talking about what good stewardship looks like, and Brett really had some very cool points about how to be thinking about your stewardship beyond just a final report once the funds are spent down, right? And so my question for you, Brett, is what could we learn from the for-profit sector when we think about our reporting and how we want to keep our foundation partners up to speed with the work that they're helping make happen?
Thanks. So I'm a big fan of learning from multiple industries, and just one of the programs that MFA happens to run alongside all the other things that we do is we run an accelerator program with Mars where we work with startup founders and we help them to get off the ground, we help them to build their business, hopefully to have a profitable business that's running for years and years. I spend a lot of my time in that world helping the entrepreneurs to understand what's going on in the shelter community. In this instance, I get to go the other way, and one of the things that the for-profit companies do a fantastic job of is on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, they will provide to us just a status report. And it's usually an email with just a single page. It's what revenues have we got, what losses have we got, what are we in for the next quarter, the next half year, just those kinds of quick bullet points. Again, to what Mary said, just make it short and sweet. We get those from every one of the companies that we invest in on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. And I think if grantees would start to do that to their grantors, there would be a lot tighter relationship. At that point, I would know exactly what someone is doing and exactly how it's progressing. I would know if the results are coming to where we want it to be. And I would plan ahead for 2024 so that I could grant them more money. So I think that would be a really valuable thing for you guys to start doing. Someone on the team should be pulling together that email and communicating to the grantees or the grantors.
I would say in many cases, what's being used to report out to the board could even be repurposed. There's no need to start from scratch on a lot of these concepts. Mary, I have a question for you. These are a lot of really straightforward answers, did you ask what they want, right? But this is a really straightforward question too. How do you know that your stewardship plan that you're wanting to put in place for this funder is the right stewardship plan?
Just going to say what you just said.
I know.
Did you ask them?
Totally stole your thunder.
I think you just ask, right? So as Gina and Brad have already said, like the relationship doesn't end when the check comes in the door, right? The hard work continues of continuing that conversation so that the goals of that particular grant are met, and also you're setting yourself up to continue the relationship in the future, right? So it's really important to ask them what suits their needs best in terms of stewardship. Give them some examples. So do you want to hear from email or by mail? Do you want to be invited to exciting events that we have throughout the year? Are there other touch points that you might want to engage with our organization in? Just ask them, and that will help continue the conversation and make sure that you are striking that right balance between going dark and not responding at all and inundating them and flooding them, right? Be sure that you are responsive to the parameters of the grant that they have set, their reporting deadlines. Make sure that you meet those deadlines, and that if things are going awry or sideways, or you're experiencing something unexpected with your program, the funder isn't hearing about it for the first time on a report that comes in on the day of the deadline, right? Continue that conversation, pick up the phone or send an email to share with them what's going on, what your unexpected challenge might have been, and what you're doing to overcome those obstacles. And in many cases, in most cases, as long as you are straight with them about what's going on, they will be anxious to hear from you, celebrate the ways that you're overcoming challenges or getting through barriers, and perhaps even offer suggestions or advice or other resources to connect your organization as it navigates whatever you're navigating. So make sure that you're in touch with them. It's not seen as a failure. They're not going to ask for your money back unless you're doing something egregious or misusing the funds. They want you to succeed with the funding, right? Then also you can ask them, are there other ways that the relationship can flourish in terms of what else they might offer grantees? Some foundations will offer technical assistance or capacity building. They might want to connect you with other funders. They might want to connect you with elected officials. They might host their own events that you could be a part of, or they might have suggestions about other organizations doing great work in an adjacent space that you could collaborate with or connect with. So be sure to ask those questions as well.
And then I have one more question for Brett, but please, Lori and Mary, feel free to add to this if there's anything, and then we're going to open it up to any questions that you guys have on all sides, like a long room. But I would like to know, Brett, are there any key trends or shifts with foundation giving and that particular philanthropy space in recent years that are standing out to you? I know that AI was kind of mentioned, but yeah, what trends should we be aware of?
I'll leave some of the other trends for you two to cover because I know you have passion around some of them. AI is definitely one of mine that I'm very interested in. I think it will fundamentally change grant writing and it'll change proposal writing. If you don't see that yet, you should look into it. You don't have to write the grant. You don't have to write the proposal anymore. You can let ChatGPT do it for you. You just have to edit it. Always, just my one bit of advice, always be aware that anything you put into a free ChatGPT session is now public information. So either buy an actual subscription or don't put something in that you don't want out there. But AI is going to change a lot of stuff in how we do business. I think it will probably open the door, from my perspective, it'll open the door a little bit more for storytelling rather than answering the questions. Because if I get two answers to the proposal that are exactly the same, I'll know. So definitely look into it and chase what AI can do for you.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. And to be honest, if I could, reverse things, I would be talking to a bunch of funders and saying you should do these things on behalf of grantees. But I'll mention a few trends that we're seeing. So one, and these are all hopefully pretty positive. So one thing is an increasing number of grantees are streamlining, or grantors are streamlining their grant requirements. And this can be everything from shorter proposals to very little reporting or no reporting, or reporting via a phone conversation with the grantee. A second one is capacity building grants to help you do internal capacity building, whether it's strategic planning or developing a fundraising campaign, so forth. Another one is more multi-year general operating support so that you don't have to necessarily get $2,000 for a particular project. Speaking of $2,000, another trend is called true cost, which is not very many funders do this, hopefully more will. But true cost means that essentially a funder asks you not just what the project will cost, but what does the project cost inclusive of staff time and benefits and indirect admin costs. A couple of others, again, I mentioned DEI, especially racial justice, earlier. I think that is a growing trend, a recognition that, again, it's a moral imperative and it's a recognition that none of us will succeed on anything we do unless we are engaging with BIPOC-led and BIPOC-serving leaders and organizations. Another one is listening to grantees gasp and acting on their ideas and feedback. So I think both Brett and Mary have mentioned this, but asking grantees questions and getting their ideas and input before we necessarily start with ours. Working in greater proximity to the people and communities and the animals. I mean, if you speak dog or cat. But working in close proximity and again, listening to people and communities closest to the issues that may or may not be your grantee organizations. The final one is, putting grantees first. And increasingly that is part of it. And that could mean inviting grantees to the decision-making table, participatory grant making. And that can be everything from grantees helping set the criteria for grants to grantees actually helping make the decisions. That's a toughie. They've all got pros and cons, but those are some really interesting trends that I hope even more funders will adopt because they're grantee-centered. They're centered around the organizations as opposed to the funders.
Lori, I have to add in there, if you're not including indirect cost rates into your budgets, when you think about budgets, please do. And you could just Google indirect cost rate equation and it will show you how to do that with your 990. Like all you need is your 990. It'll show you how you can build a percentage point. But the Gates Foundation and several, like MacArthur Foundation, all of these really large foundations have great statements on why the keeping the lights on funding is just as important as the programmatic funding. So I love that suggestion.
Yeah,
Thank
could
you.
I say one other thing about that is it could be that you are considering things as indirect that aren't, that actually are programmatic or project costs. So if you can, take a step back when you think about your quote unquote indirect costs, what those are. And I personally think that almost any indirect cost is actually a program or project cost. It doesn't necessarily happen that easily, but that's just, I think that's true.
Are we ready to, Mary, did you want to add anything? Or
No, let's head to the Q&A. These
All
guys
right,
covered all
yeah.
the juicy ones for me.
Likewise.
Does anyone here have a question that they would like to ask? We have someone right here.
This year I actually wrote a grant to a foundation, and I was surprised because they called me and said that they were unfortunate that they were declining me on this cycle, but the next cycle opened up in January, so to please resubmit. So I'm new at this, so my question is, does that mean they were interested in it and they just didn't have me for a slot? And definitely fill out the next application again in January?
100%.
Definitely fill it out.
Yes, 110,000%, yes. Absolutely. They would not bother to pick up the phone and invite you to apply again if they weren't sincere about it.
I was very shocked about the phone call.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what Lori was saying about how funders are working more closely with grantees to recognize outwardly the hard work that grantees will put into a proposal. And so they're not going to invite you to resubmit and spend your time doing that if they don't have a sincere interest. I'm not guaranteeing you the money, but it will be time well spent. In terms of the relationship building thread that we've been touching on, it is okay when you get a call like that to say, hey, like what stood out from you from the proposal? what were the parts that were left you confused, or what could we do to strengthen our partnership, or are there other things that you would like to see from your successful applicants? Ask those kinds of questions, and hopefully they will give you some of that feedback. But yes, keep them. Now, that's your invitation to start sharing more and more about your organization with them. Absolutely. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
I saw it. There's a hand up.
Mine was. My question, I think, got answered a little bit, but I was going to ask, sometimes you just get the automatic rejection email, or there's someone who had funded us for several years in a row, and then you just go, oh, we had too many, sorry, and that's it. How do you feel about then the grantee reaching out and saying, could you give me feedback on what I should do next time, or why we didn't get funded this time? And then should that be, it sounds like that should probably be the executive director versus the grant writer asking?
Yes, I think those questions are always appropriate, and if the donor isn't in a spot to respond with more detail, they won't. But it cannot hurt you to respectfully ask those types of questions, and the ones that you asked are great. What could we do to strengthen our proposal, or what changed in your giving priorities, or is there another time that this might be a better fit for you? All of those are very appropriate questions, and yes, I agree that they should come from leadership if possible, just to kind of give that weight, if you will, to the conversation. And if in the case that you mentioned of a funder who had been funding you for many years and then dropped off, that's an especially important time to have those conversations. And it's not a time for you to stop communicating with them or inviting them to events or sharing your organization's milestones with them. Keep them in your network because you don't know what will change in the future.
Who was it over here?
Fact-
Please.
The fact that it blindsided you speaks to the relationship, and I would put most of that on the grantee, on the grantor, that they need to be communicating with you a lot better. There should never be a surprise like that. So I think all the more reason to ask them, and from the executive director level, they should say, hey, that was a shock, what happened? But it also speaks to the fact that there should be a lot more frequent communication.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add is, if a funder does that to you, just cuts you off, they suck.
Amen.
So true.
Really, it's just they suck. And I'd say one other question, if you're comfortable with asking it, is, this is tough, that we've been relying on your funding for a while and now we're not getting it. Is there any way that you could offer a smaller amount to help us? Or introduce us to other funders, or something that could help us kind of transition off from your dollars.
Who was it over here?
Oh, that was me. I had a comment and a question. First, thank you for including the staffing costs and things like that, because for a very long time it seemed like the expectation was that this work would happen without the efforts of the humans behind it. So thank you. My question is, when we're doing budgeting, we deal with a lot of costs that vary greatly, especially a lot of travel costs and supplies that can be affected by supply chain or things like that. How do you approach funders when, because a lot of times these processes can take up to, like a year or longer from the initial budget to then when we're actually doing the work. So how do you address those changes in costs when I'm like, travel is all of a sudden twice as much as we thought, or supplies are, up by 30%, something like that?
The hard answer is there's no more behind that. So if costs went up, you underestimated. I know you don't want to hear that, but because of that, I would overestimate, and I would go bigger. That's a dirty way of saying it, but yeah.
Let's do the last one.
All right, we have time for one more, it sounds like.
Hello, thank you for being here and for all this great information. My question is, I keep hearing director-driven, director response, board of director-driven. So how do I put this? So what about the development people, the grant writers who actually know more most of the time than the directors because they wrote the grant. They live, eat, sleep, and you're nodding your head, you understand. Why would, if you can elaborate more on why it is more important for any kind of response, like why did we get rejected? They probably won't even, they hired us to do the job so that they wouldn't have to be out in the community, so that they don't have to go out because they've got their other roles and responsibilities to do. So how do we work, or how can we work with funders? Because it kind of seems like, well, yeah, you submitted the grant, but we really just want to talk to the director. It's really the director or somebody higher, quote unquote, than you, when a lot of the times we do have that responsibility and or I don't know how to put it without sounding like we count. You know, what we've done all the work. That's what we were hired for. That's what we went to school for. That's what we learned, you know, boots on the ground for. And then it's like, well, you know, thank you. It's just, we just see that your title is a development, but you're not the executive director. I don't know. It's more of a comment, I guess, and then how can we bridge that?
Give her the title.
I can say two things on that. I'm the CEO at our organization. There's a heck of a lot that happens in our organization that is run by people that are way smarter than I am on that topic, and probably overall also. But I'm the one in the end that has to have a relationship often with elected officials or with someone like that. So with that said, I think if you are the person and the executive director has given you that role, you have to have the relationship, and yeah, you will own it, and you'll be the one that has to get approved, get declined. You'll have to have the relationship that supports that subsequent call on why did you decline us. You're taking on that role for the organization. I think you get to step up into it. And some executive directors are fine with that, and that's great. If they realize their weaknesses and they put you in that role, cool.
I think I would add, first of all, just let me respect what you just said. I think development directors don't get the credit they deserve. So I'd say a couple things. One is that you're in a great position. Well, so the first thing I'd say is when I hear development director, I hear this person is calling to ask for money. And so what a funder doesn't necessarily know is that you have all of the knowledge that you have. You know it. A funder doesn't necessarily, because the title can carry a bad rap that is undeserved, but it sometimes can. So a couple things. One is, I guess you can ask yourself whether you need to kind of use your title up front. I know that's hard to maybe avoid a title. I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but if it's about starting with your knowledge, both of the funder and your organization, try to lead with that. The second one is you are in an incredibly good position to be strategic, to think about who should talk to the funder, at what times, at what junctures, why, how to make the best use of your executive director's time and relationships, et cetera. So it is about your respecting your expertise, et cetera. And I would just say that, beyond whether you have a direct connection to the funder or not, you have strategic knowledge for the organization. And that may or may not put you up front, but it puts you in a great leadership position to think about all of the assets that you have to deploy on behalf of the organization and the relationship with the funder.